The telegram clutched in Nora Jensen's gloved hand announced that someone had been shot dead at the Silver Dollar Saloon, and she had exactly 10 minutes to deliver it to Sheriff Morrison before the killer could skip town on the afternoon stage. Her boots hammered against the wooden boardwalk as she ran through Jerome Junction, Arizona Territory, the July sun of 1883 beating down mercilessly on her neck. The mining town sprawled across Cleopatra Hill in a jumble of wooden structures and stone buildings, the constant rumble of ore carts and machinery providing a backdrop to daily life. Nora had been delivering messages for nearly 2 years now, ever since her father's death in a mining accident left her and her mother struggling to make ends meet. Most messages were mundane business correspondence or social invitations, but occasionally something like this came through, something that made her heart pound and her feet move faster. She burst through the sheriff's office door, startling the deputy who had been dozing at the front desk. "Where's Morrison?" she gasped, still clutching the telegram. "Out back, checking on a prisoner," the deputy said, suddenly alert. "What's the emergency? Murder at the Silver Dollar," Nora said, pushing past him toward the cells. "The telegram just came through from the telegraph office." Sheriff Morrison, a grizzled man in his 50s with a tobacco-stained mustache, looked up sharply as Nora approached. He read the telegram quickly, his expression darkening. "Danny, get the horses," he barked at the deputy. "Miss Jensen, who sent this? The bartender, I think." Mr. Kowalski at the telegraph office didn't say much, just that it was urgent. The sheriff nodded curtly and brushed past her, already moving into action. Nora stepped back out into the blinding sunlight, her job complete for this particular message. Her canvas bag still held 3 more telegrams to deliver before she could call it a day, and the afternoon heat was only getting worse. She made her way down the steep street, navigating between freight wagons and men on horseback. Jerome Junction clung to the hillside at a precarious angle, and newcomers often joked that if you fell out of bed in this town, you might not stop rolling until you hit the valley floor. Nora had grown up here, though, and her feet knew every uneven board and loose stone. Her next delivery took her to the assay office, where a nervous mine owner was waiting for results on a new claim. The message was good news, and the man pressed a silver dollar into her hand as a tip, which she tucked gratefully into her pocket. Tips were unpredictable but welcome, and this one would buy flour and coffee beans for the week. The 4th message went to the boarding house on the east side of town, where a woman burst into tears upon reading that her sister had safely arrived in San Francisco. Nora waited awkwardly while the woman composed herself, then accepted her standard fee of 15 cents and moved on. The final telegram of the day was addressed to Hank Collar, care of the Triple K Ranch, 3 miles outside of town. Nora's heart sank a little. The ranch deliveries were the hardest part of her job, requiring her to rent a horse from the livery stable, which cut into her profits. But Mr. Kowalski at the telegraph office had emphasized that this message needed to arrive today, and Hank Collar had a reputation for tipping well, so she headed for the stables. Old Pete, who ran the livery, had a gentle mare named Rosie ready for her. "Heading out to the Triple K?" he asked, helping her into the saddle. "Last delivery of the day," Nora confirmed. "Should be back before sunset. Watch yourself out there. Heard there's been some trouble with cattle rustlers in the hills lately." Nora nodded, though she was not particularly worried. The road to the Triple K was well traveled, and it was broad daylight. She urged Rosie forward, grateful for the slight breeze that picked up as they left town. The landscape around Jerome Junction was a study in contrasts: green juniper and pinyon pine clinging to red rock hillsides, with the occasional saguaro cactus standing sentinel. The mines had scarred parts of the terrain, but there was still a wild beauty to the high desert country. Nora had never traveled far from home, but she could not imagine living anywhere else. The Triple K Ranch came into view after about 40 minutes of steady riding. It was a substantial operation, with a large main house, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see several cowboys working near the barn. The Collar family had been in the area for nearly a decade, building their ranch into one of the most successful in the territory. Nora dismounted at the hitching post near the main house and tied Rosie securely. Before she could knock, the front door opened, and a woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes looked her over. "You must be the message girl," the woman said. It was not quite a question. "Yes, madam, Nora Jensen. I have a telegram for Hank Collar. He's out with the herd. Won't be back until supper time." The woman crossed her arms. "I'm his mother, Margaret Collar. I can see that he gets it." Nora hesitated. Her instructions were always to deliver messages directly to the addressee when possible, but sometimes that simply was not practical. "It's marked urgent, madam." Margaret Collar's expression softened slightly. "I'll send one of the hands out to fetch him right now. You can wait in the shade on the porch. I'll bring you some water. You look half-cooked." Before Nora could protest that she was fine, the older woman had already disappeared inside. Nora settled onto a bench on the wide porch, setting her delivery bag beside her. True to her word, Margaret returned moments later with a tin cup of cool water and a thick slice of bread with butter. "Eat that. You're skinny as a rail," Margaret said matter-of-factly. "I sent Tommy out to get Hank. Shouldn't be more than half an hour." "Thank you, madam. That's very kind." Margaret waved off the gratitude and sat down in a rocking chair, picking up some mending she had apparently been working on. "I remember your father," she said after a moment. "Edward Jensen. Worked the mine at the south end. Terrible thing, that accident." "Yes, madam." Nora kept her voice steady, though talking about her father's death still hurt, even after 2 years. "You're doing good work taking care of your mother. Not many young women would have the grit to run messages all over creation. How old are you now?" 20, madam." "I'll be 21 in November." "Good age. You should be thinking about marriage, settling down. Pretty girl like you must have plenty of suitors." Nora felt her cheeks warm. "I don't have time for courting, madam. My mother needs me." Margaret made a non-committal sound and returned her attention to her mending. They sat in companionable silence, and Nora ate the bread slowly, savoring the rich butter. Her own meals were usually simpler fare. The sound of hoofbeats announced Hank Collar's arrival before she saw him. He rode into the yard at an easy canter, his horse's coat gleaming with sweat. When he dismounted and turned toward the porch, Nora found herself staring. She had seen Hank Collar before, of course. Jerome Junction was not so large that residents did not know each other by sight. But she had never really looked at him. He was tall, probably a few inches over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked hard for a living. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and curled slightly where it touched his collar. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking pale blue-green that seemed almost luminous in his sun-bronzed face. He looked to be in his mid-20s, and when he smiled at her, removing his hat, she felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the heat. "Miss Jensen," he said, his voice a pleasant baritone, "I hear you have a message for me." Nora stood quickly, fumbling in her bag for the telegram. "Yes, sir. It's marked urgent." He took the envelope from her, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "Thank you for riding all the way out here." He opened the telegram and read it quickly, his expression growing serious. "My brother's coming home from Colorado, arriving next week. Good news, I hope." Margaret asked from her rocking chair. Should be. Says he's bringing his new wife with him. Hank looked back at Nora. What do I owe you for the delivery? 25 cents, please. The ranch deliveries cost a bit more because of the horse rental. Hank reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver dollar. Keep the change. You earned it riding out in this heat. That's too much, Nora protested, but he had already closed her fingers around the coin. It's a fair tip for good service. Ma, can we offer Miss Jensen some supper before she heads back? It's getting late. I was just about to suggest the same thing, Margaret said, standing up. The hands will be eating in about 20 minutes. You're welcome to join us, Miss Jensen. Nora wanted to refuse. She still needed to return the horse to old Pete and get home to help her mother with the evening chores, but her stomach betrayed her with a small growl. The bread had been good, but it had been a long, hard day, and the smell of cooking food wafting from the house was irresistible. If it's not too much trouble, she said. No trouble at all, Margaret said firmly. Come inside and wash up. The interior of the ranch house was cooler than outside, with thick adobe walls that kept the worst of the heat at bay. Margaret showed Nora to a washroom where she could clean the dust from her hands and face. When she emerged, the older woman led her to a large dining room with 2 long tables. Ranch hands were filing in, removing their hats and taking seats. Hank appeared from another doorway and gestured for Nora to sit near the head of one table, where the family took their meals. The food was simple but abundant: beef stew, fresh bread, beans, and stewed tomatoes. Nora tried not to eat too quickly, conscious of her manners, but everything tasted wonderful. The ranch hands were a jovial group, teasing each other and telling stories about the day's work. Hank sat across from her, and she found herself hyper-aware of his presence. So how did you end up delivering telegrams, Miss Jensen? He asked, passing her the bread basket. After my father died, we needed the income, Nora said simply. Mr. Kowalski at the telegraph office was looking for someone reliable, and I knew the town well. It seemed like a good fit. You ride out to the ranches often, a few times a week, depending on the messages. Most of my deliveries are in town, though. Must be interesting work. You probably know everyone's business before they do. Nora shook her head firmly. I never read the messages, sir. That would be a violation of trust. People depend on me to be discreet. Something in Hank's expression shifted, a new respect dawning in his eyes. That's admirable. Not everyone would be so honorable. After supper, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Hank insisted on riding back to town with her. It's not safe for a woman alone after dark, he said when she protested. There's been trouble with rustlers and worse. Margaret packed some leftover bread and a jar of preserved peaches for Nora to take home, refusing to accept any protest. For your mother, she said firmly. And you come back any time, dear. It's nice to have another woman around this place. The ride back to Jerome Junction was beautiful in the cooling evening air. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, and the first stars began to appear. Hank kept his horse at an easy pace beside Rosie, occasionally pointing out landmarks or telling her stories about the ranch. We've had the Triple K for almost 10 years now, he said. My father started it, but he died 6 years ago. Heart gave out one day while he was mending fence. Since then, it's been me and Ma running things, with my brother helping until he went to Colorado last year. It must be hard work, Nora said. It is, but I love it. There's something about working the land, building something that will last. I want to have sons someday, pass the ranch down to them. He paused. Sorry, that probably sounds presumptuous, talking about sons when I don't even have a wife. It sounds like you have clear goals. That's not a bad thing. They talked easily as they rode, and Nora found herself relaxing in his company. Hank was easy to talk to, with a self-deprecating sense of humor and a genuine interest in what she had to say. By the time they reached the livery stable in Jerome Junction, she was genuinely sorry the ride was over. "Thank you for the escort," she said as they dismounted. "It was kind of you." "It was my pleasure, Miss Jensen." He hesitated, then added, "I hope you'll have cause to deliver messages to the Triple K again soon." "I'm sure I will. Your mother seems to think your brother will want to send telegrams once he arrives." "True enough." He smiled at her, and in the lamplight from the stable his eyes seemed to glow. "Safe travels home, Miss Jensen. Please call me Nora." "Only if you call me Hank," she nodded, feeling that strange flutter in her chest again. "Good night, Hank." "Good night, Nora." She walked home through the darkening streets, clutching Margaret's gifts and thinking about pale blue-green eyes. Her mother, Sarah, was waiting up for her in their small two-room house on the outskirts of town. "You're later than usual," Sarah said, rising from her chair with difficulty. She had developed painful arthritis in her knees after years of working as a laundress, taking in washing from the miners and townspeople. At 45, she looked older, worn down by hard work and grief. "I had a delivery out to the Triple K ranch and they insisted I stay for supper," Nora explained, showing her mother the bread and preserves. "Mrs. Collar sent these for you." Sarah's eyes widened. "That was generous of her. I should send a thank you note." "I'm sure I'll be out there again soon." "I can thank her for you." Nora helped her mother to the small table and began preparing tea. "How was your day? Did Mrs. Patterson's laundry get picked up?" They talked about mundane things: customers, payments, the price of soap, but Nora's mind kept drifting back to the ranch, to the easy conversation and the way Hank had smiled at her. She told herself not to be foolish. Men like Hank Collar, who owned substantial ranches and had prospects, did not court poor message girls who lived in tiny houses and took in laundry. Still, when she lay down to sleep that night, she found herself hoping that someone at the Triple K would need to send a telegram soon. The next few days followed their usual pattern. Nora woke early, helped her mother with the laundry before the heat became unbearable, then reported to the telegraph office for her daily deliveries. Most were routine business correspondence, invoices, the occasional personal message. She tried not to think about Hank Collar, but it was difficult. His face kept appearing in her mind at odd moments, and she found herself taking extra care with her appearance in the mornings, even though she told herself it was ridiculous. On the fourth day after her visit to the Triple K, Mr. Kowalski had an unusual request for her. "I need you to deliver this one personally to Hank Collar at the ranch," he said, handing her a sealed envelope. "And there's a message for him to send back if he wants. Wait for his reply." Nora's heart did a small leap, but she kept her voice professional. "Of course, sir. I'll head out right away." The ride to the ranch felt both longer and shorter than before. When she arrived, she found Hank working in one of the corrals, training a young horse. He saw her approaching and immediately handed the lead rope to one of his ranch hands, striding over to meet her. "Nora," he said, and she liked the way her name sounded in his voice. "This is a pleasant surprise. I have a telegram for you, and Mr. Kowalski said to wait for a reply if you have one." Hank took the envelope and opened it, reading quickly. His expression grew thoughtful. "It's about a cattle sale. I do need to send a response." He looked at her, then at the hot sun overhead. "Come inside while I write it. No sense in you standing out here in the heat." He led her into the ranch house, to a study lined with books and ranch records. Margaret appeared with cool water and some cookies, greeting Nora warmly. "I was hoping you'd come back soon, dear. How's your mother?" "She's well, thank you. She appreciated the preserves very much." "Good, good. I'll send more home with you today." Margaret disappeared again, leaving Nora alone with Hank. He sat at the desk, pulling out paper and a pen. "This might take me a few minutes. I need to think about the numbers." "Take your time," Nora said, settling into a chair near the window. She watched him work, admiring the way he concentrated, his brow furrowing slightly as he calculated figures. After about 10 minutes, he finished and sealed the message in an envelope. "Here you are," he said, handing it to her. Then he pulled out another envelope. "And I have something else I'd like you to deliver to yourself." Nora took it confused. "To myself?" "Yes, but don't read it until you get back to town. Promise me." "All right, I promise." His eyes held hers for a long moment, and she saw something in them, nervousness, maybe, or hope. "Thank you. For everything." The ride back to Jerome Junction seemed to take forever. Nora's curiosity burned, but she had given her word. She delivered Hank's business message to Mr. Kowalski first, collected her fee, then finally allowed herself to open the second envelope. Inside was a brief message in Hank's strong, clear handwriting. "Miss Nora Jensen, I know this is unusual and perhaps too forward, but I can't stop thinking about you. Would you do me the honor of allowing me to court you? If your answer is yes, please send word. If no, I'll understand and won't trouble you again. Respectfully, Hank Collar." Nora read it 3 times, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Hank Collar wanted to court her. Hank Collar, who owned a ranch and had those incredible eyes and made her feel things she had never felt before. She practically ran back to the telegraph office. Mr. Kowalski looked up in surprise. "Miss Jensen, did you forget something?" "I need to send a telegram to Hank Collar at the Triple K Ranch," she said breathlessly. "Right away." The older man raised his eyebrows but pulled out a message form. "What would you like it to say?" Nora thought for a moment, then smiled. "Just write, yes, that's all, just yes." Mr. Kowalski's expression softened into something knowing. "I'll send it right away. And Miss Jensen, young Collar is a good man. You could do a lot worse." "Thank you, sir." She floated home that evening, barely touching the ground. Her mother noticed immediately. "You look like you've swallowed sunshine," Sarah said. "What happened?" Nora told her everything: the telegram, Hank's message, her reply. Sarah listened carefully, her expression a mixture of joy and concern. "He's a good man from a good family," Sarah said slowly. "But courting leads to marriage, and marriage means leaving me alone." "Mama, I would never abandon you," Nora said quickly, kneeling beside her mother's chair. "Never. Whatever happens, we'll work it out together." Sarah cupped her daughter's face in her worn hands. "You're a good girl, Nora. You've already sacrificed so much for me. I won't have you giving up a chance at happiness. If Hank Collar is the man you want, you pursue that with my blessing. We'll manage whatever comes." They embraced, and Nora felt tears prick her eyes. She had been so focused on taking care of her mother that she had almost convinced herself she would never marry, never have a family of her own. Now, suddenly, that future seemed possible. The next morning, a reply came through the telegraph office. Hank's message was brief but made her heart sing. "May I call on you this Sunday afternoon? HK." She sent back an immediate yes and spent the next 3 days in a state of nervous anticipation. She and her mother cleaned their small house until it gleamed, and Nora carefully mended her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes. Sunday arrived bright and warm. Nora dressed carefully, braiding her honey blonde hair and pinching her cheeks to give them color. When Hank knocked on their door at 2 o'clock sharp, she took a deep breath before opening it. He stood on the threshold in clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his hat in his hands. His hair was still damp, as if he had just bathed. He looked nervous and hopeful and impossibly handsome. "Hello, Nora," he said softly. "Hello, Hank. Please come in." He greeted Sarah with perfect courtesy, and they sat in the small front room making polite conversation about the weather and the ranch. After a suitable interval, Hank cleared his throat. "Mrs. Jensen, I was hoping I might take Nora for a walk if that's acceptable to you. We'd stay in town, of course, where everything is proper." Sarah smiled. "I think that would be fine. Nora, take your shawl in case the wind picks up." They walked through Jerome Junction's winding streets, heading up toward the hills where the views opened up. Other townsfolk nodded greetings as they passed, and Nora knew there would be talk. A young woman walking with a man meant courting, and courting meant intentions. "I've been thinking about you constantly since we met," Hank said once they were alone on a quiet path. "I know it's fast and maybe I'm being a fool, but I can't help how I feel." "You're not being a fool," Nora said quietly. "I've been thinking about you too." They talked for hours, sitting on a flat rock overlooking the valley. Hank told her about his dreams for the ranch, his hopes for the future. Nora shared her memories of her father, her fears for her mother, her own dreams of someday having a home and family. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, as if they had known each other for years instead of days. As the sun began to set, Hank walked her home. At her doorstep, he took her hand gently. "May I call on you again next Sunday? I'd like that very much. And perhaps during the week, if you have evening deliveries near the ranch, you might stay for supper." "I might," she agreed, smiling. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Nora." "Good night, Hank." Thus began the most wonderful weeks of Nora's life. Hank courted her properly, calling every Sunday and sending frequent telegrams that made Mr. Kowalski smile knowingly. Whenever Nora had deliveries near the Triple K, she would stop by, and Margaret began teaching her ranch cooking and management, clearly approving of the match. The other ranch hands began to tease Hank good-naturedly about being love-struck, and he did not deny it. He would ride into town on his days off just to walk with Nora for an hour, and brought small gifts for both her and Sarah: fresh beef from the ranch, vegetables from Margaret's garden, a warm shawl when the fall weather started to turn cool. About 2 months into their courtship, Hank's brother Joshua arrived from Colorado with his new wife, Eleanor. The couple was young and clearly besotted with each other, and Eleanor immediately befriended Nora. Having another young woman around made ranch visits even more pleasant, and Eleanor confided that she hoped Nora would soon officially be part of the family. "Hank talks about you constantly," Eleanor said one afternoon while they were shelling peas on the ranch house porch. "I think he's planning to propose soon." Nora's heart skipped. "Did he say something?" "Not directly, but I've seen him talking to your mother in town, and he's been asking Margaret about wedding traditions. I think he's just working up the courage." That evening, as Hank walked Nora to where she had tied her horse, he seemed nervous. "I have something I need to ask you," he said, "but I want to do it right. Will you come to the ranch this Saturday? There's something I want to show you." "Of course," Nora agreed, though her pulse was racing. Could this be it? Was he going to propose? Saturday dawned clear and beautiful, autumn painting the landscape in golds and reds. Nora wore her best dress and took extra care with her hair. When she arrived at the ranch, Hank was waiting, mounted on his favorite horse with Rosie already saddled beside him. "We're going for a ride," he said, helping her mount. "I want to show you something special." They rode for about half an hour, following a trail that wound up into the hills behind the ranch. Finally, they reached a beautiful meadow with a clear stream running through it. The grass was still green here, protected by tall pines, and the view stretched for miles. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Hank said, dismounting and helping her down. "I come here when I need to think. I wanted you to see it." They walked to the stream, and Hank spread out a blanket he had brought in his saddlebag. They sat together, and for a moment he just looked at her, his eyes soft with emotion. "Nora, I know we haven't known each other long, only about 3 months, but in my heart it feels like I've known you forever. You're everything I've been looking for: strong, kind, smart, beautiful. You work hard and you're loyal to your family. I love the way you laugh and the way you see the world. I love your integrity and your spirit." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Nora's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "It was my grandmother's," Hank said softly. "Ma gave it to me last week and told me I'd be a fool to let you go. Nora Jensen, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and help me build a life on this ranch? I promise I'll take care of you and your mother. I'll do everything in my power to make you happy." Tears sprang to Nora's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Hank, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gently at first, then with more passion. Nora had never been kissed before, but it felt right, like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you," Hank said. "I should have said that first. I love you, Nora." "I love you too," she replied, and saying the words felt like magic. They stayed in the meadow for another hour, making plans and talking about their future. Hank wanted to marry soon before winter if possible. He had already spoken to Sarah, asking for her blessing and promising that she would always have a home with them at the ranch. Sarah had given her permission gladly, with tears in her eyes. When they returned to the ranch house, Margaret, Joshua, and Alina were waiting with champagne and a cake, having clearly been in on the plan. They celebrated long into the evening, and Nora felt more joy than she had known since her father's death. She had found not just a husband, but a whole new family. The engagement period was brief. They set the wedding date for the first Saturday in November, giving them just over a month to prepare. Margaret and Alina took charge of most of the planning, which was a relief since Nora had never organized anything more complicated than her daily message routes. Sarah contributed what she could, sewing Nora's wedding dress from fabric that Hank insisted on purchasing, despite Sarah's protests that it was too expensive. The dress was beautiful cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Sarah's stitching was impeccable, and when Nora tried it on for the first time, she cried at her reflection in the mirror. She looked like a different person, no longer just the message girl but a woman about to become a rancher's wife. Hank and Nora followed all the proper conventions of courtship, but it was increasingly difficult to say goodnight at her door, to limit their kisses to brief, chaste touches. The attraction between them was powerful, and more than once Hank had to remind himself to be a gentleman. He wanted her desperately, but he also respected her too much to compromise her reputation. Their wedding night would come soon enough. In the meantime, Nora continued her message deliveries, though everyone in Jerome Junction now knew she was soon to be married. Some of the miners who had previously made inappropriate comments now tipped their hats respectfully, recognizing that she was under the protection of the Collar family. Mr. Kowalski began training a replacement, a young man named Thomas, who would take over Nora's routes after the wedding. "You've been the best employee I've ever had," Kowalski told her one afternoon. "Reliable, discreet, hardworking. I'm sorry to lose you, but I'm happy for you too. Marriage to a good man is a blessing." "Thank you, sir. This job saved me and my mother. I'll always be grateful for the opportunity." As the wedding date approached, Nora found herself getting nervous. She knew the basics of what happened between a husband and wife. Her mother had given her a stilted, embarrassed explanation, but the reality still felt mysterious and a little frightening. Alina, who had been married for nearly a year, was more helpful, assuring her that it would be wonderful with a man she loved. "Hank is crazy about you," Alina said while they were addressing wedding invitations. "He'll be gentle and patient. Don't worry so much." The night before the wedding, Nora lay awake in her small room, looking around at the familiar space she had occupied for most of her life. Tomorrow, she would sleep in a different bed in the ranch house with her new husband. Her whole life was about to change. "Mama," she called softly. "Are you awake?" Sarah appeared in the doorway, a shawl wrapped around her nightgown. "Can't sleep. Too much running through my head." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, taking her daughter's hand. "Scared a little, excited too. Is that normal?" "Very normal. I felt the same way before I married your father." Sarah's voice grew tender with memory. "He was a good man, your father, not perfect, but good. And Hank is a good man too. You're making the right choice. What if I'm not a good enough wife? What if I can't do all the things a ranch wife needs to do? You'll learn. Margaret and Alina will help you, and Hank loves you for who you are, not for what you can do. Just be yourself, work hard, and love him. That's all anyone can ask." They embraced, holding each other tight. "I'm going to miss living with you," Nora whispered. "I'm going to miss you too, sweetheart. But you'll only be 3 miles away, and we'll see each other all the time. This is how it's supposed to be, children growing up and building their own lives. I'm so proud of you." The wedding day dawned cool and crisp, perfect autumn weather. The ceremony would be held at the small Catholic church in Jerome Junction, followed by a reception at the ranch. Margaret and Alina arrived early to help Nora dress and style her hair. When she was finally ready, she looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. The church was packed with friends and neighbors, ranchers and miners, people from every level of Jerome Junction society. Hank stood at the altar in a new suit, his eyes fixed on the back of the church, where Nora would appear. When she finally entered on the arm of old Pete from the livery stable, the closest thing she had to a father figure, Hank's expression transformed into something between awe and joy. She walked down the aisle slowly, her eyes never leaving his. When she reached the altar and Pete placed her hand in Hank's, she felt a current run between them, a connection that seemed to light up her entire body. Father O'Brien, the young priest who served Jerome Junction's Catholic community, led them through the vows. When it came time for Hank to speak, his voice was strong and clear. "I, Hank Collar, take you, Nora Jensen, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and cherish you in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death parts us." Nora's voice shook slightly as she repeated the vows, but the words came from her heart. When Father O'Brien finally pronounced them husband and wife, and told Hank he could kiss his bride, the kiss was decorous but full of promise. The church erupted in applause. The reception at the ranch was a joyous affair. Long tables had been set up outside, laden with food that Margaret and the ranch hands had been preparing for days. There was roasted beef, chicken, potatoes, vegetables, fresh bread, and 3 different kinds of cake. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was dancing on a wooden platform that had been constructed for the occasion. Nora danced with Hank, with Joshua, with old Pete, and with half a dozen other men who wanted to congratulate her. But her favorite dance was the last one of the evening, when the guests had mostly gone home, and it was just her and Hank, swaying together under the stars to music that existed only in their heads. "Are you happy, Mrs. Collar?" Hank whispered against her hair. "Happier than I've ever been," she replied honestly. Finally, Margaret shooed them toward the house. "Go on, you two. Everyone's leaving, and you have better things to do than stand around out here." Hank led Nora upstairs to the master bedroom, which Margaret had vacated for them. Margaret would now sleep in a smaller room down the hall, insisting that the large bedroom was meant for the main family. The room had been decorated with flowers and someone had turned down the bed. Suddenly, Nora felt shy. Hank seemed to sense it and took her hands gently. "We don't have to rush anything," he said. "I know this is all new to you." "I want to," Nora said quietly. "I'm just a little nervous." "So am I," he admitted, which surprised her. "I want everything to be perfect for you." He kissed her then, slowly and thoroughly, and gradually her nervousness gave way to something else: anticipation, desire, need. When he began to unfasten the buttons of her wedding dress, his hands were gentle but confident. She helped him, eager now, and soon they were both free of the layers of clothing that separated them. Their wedding night was everything she had hoped: tender and passionate, occasionally awkward but ultimately beautiful. Hank was patient and considerate, making sure she felt safe and loved. When they finally lay together afterward, Nora curled against his chest. She felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he replied, his arms tightening around her. "Forever." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and when Nora woke in the morning to find Hank watching her with soft eyes, she knew she had made the right choice. This was her life now, not perfect, but full of love and possibility. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Nora had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, which were very different from the schedule she had kept as a message girl. She woke before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spent her days learning to cook for large groups, manage the household accounts, and assist with lighter ranch chores. Margaret was an excellent teacher, patient and thorough, and Alina became more friend than sister-in-law. Hank was an attentive husband, always making sure she did not overwork herself and stealing moments throughout the day for quick kisses and whispered words of love. At night, they retreated to their bedroom and explored the physical aspects of marriage with increasing confidence and joy. Sarah moved into a small cottage on the ranch property that had previously been used for storage. Hank and the ranch hands fixed it up, adding a proper stove and making it comfortable. Sarah continued her laundry business, but now she had help from Alina and some of the ranch hands' wives, which meant less strain on her arthritic knees. Christmas that year was the most joyous Nora had ever experienced. The ranch house was decorated with pine boughs and candles, and Margaret cooked an enormous feast. They exchanged modest gifts. Nora had knitted Hank a warm scarf, and he gave her a beautiful leather-bound journal for recording her thoughts and daily life. As winter turned to spring, Nora began to suspect that she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses had stopped, and she felt tired and occasionally nauseous in the mornings. She confided in Alina first, who confirmed her suspicions with a knowing smile. "You should tell Hank," Alina urged. "He's going to be thrilled." Nora chose a quiet evening when they were alone in their room. Hank had just come in from a long day of spring roundup, and he was tired but happy. When she told him, he froze for a moment, then swept her into his arms with a whoop of joy. "We're going to have a baby," he said, pulling back to look at her face. Really. I think it will be born in late September or early October." Hank's eyes were suspiciously bright. "I'm going to be a father. Nora, this is wonderful. Are you feeling all right? Do you need anything? Should you be resting more?" She laughed at his sudden concern. "I'm fine. Women have been having babies forever. I'm healthy and strong." But Hank insisted on her taking things easier. He forbade her from lifting anything heavy and made sure she had time to rest in the afternoons. Margaret clucked over her like a mother hen, pressing nourishing food on her at every meal. Sarah cried happy tears when she heard the news and immediately began knitting baby clothes. The pregnancy progressed normally. though the Arizona summer heat made the last months uncomfortable. Nora's belly swelled impressively, and by August, she felt like an overripe melon. Hank thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and told her so constantly. On a crisp October morning, after a night of increasing contractions, Nora went into labor. Margaret sent one of the ranch hands racing into town to fetch the midwife while she and Alina stayed with Nora, helping her through the pain. Hank paced outside the bedroom, forbidden entry according to tradition, listening to his wife's cries with increasing distress. The labor lasted nearly 12 hours. By the time the midwife finally announced that the baby was crowning, everyone was exhausted. With one final push, Nora delivered a healthy baby boy, red-faced and wailing lustily. Margaret cleaned him quickly and placed him in Nora's arms while the midwife attended to the afterbirth. "You have a son," Margaret said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "He's perfect." Hank was finally allowed into the room. He approached the bed slowly, as if afraid he might break something. When he saw his son for the first time, nursing at Nora's breast, his face crumpled with emotion. "He's beautiful," Hank whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy. "I'd like to name him Edward after my father," Nora said. "Edward Collar, we can call him Eddie." "Edward Collar," Hank repeated, testing the name. "It's perfect." He kissed Nora's forehead gently. "You're amazing, you're so strong, I love you so much." Little Eddie was a good baby, healthy and alert. He had Hank's dark hair but Nora's eyes, and everyone agreed he was handsome. Sarah doted on her grandson, spending hours rocking him and singing old lullabies. Margaret declared he was the smartest baby she had ever seen, and Alina joked that she and Joshua needed to hurry up and have their own child so Eddie would have a cousin to play with. As Nora recovered from childbirth, she found herself marveling at how much her life had changed in just over a year. 12 months ago, she had been a lonely message girl, struggling to support her mother, with no prospects for marriage or family. Now she was a wife and mother, part of a large, loving family, living on a beautiful ranch with a man who cherished her. The years that followed were full and happy. When Eddie was 18 months old, Nora became pregnant again. This time she delivered a daughter they named Grace, after Hank's grandmother. Grace was a quieter baby than Eddie had been, with serious eyes and a thoughtful expression. 2 years later came another son, Thomas, who was a holy terror from the moment he could crawl, getting into everything and keeping everyone on their toes. Alina and Joshua had 3 children of their own during this time, 2 girls and a boy, and the ranch house was always full of noise and laughter. The cousins were close in age and played together constantly, filling the buildings and corrals with their games and adventures. Nora proved to be an excellent ranch wife. She learned to keep the books, manage the household, and even assisted during calving season when extra hands were needed. She was respected by the ranch hands for her fairness and hard work, and other ranch wives in the area sought her advice on everything from cooking to child rearing. Hank continued to be a devoted husband and father. He taught Eddie and Thomas to ride almost before they could walk, and he was gentle and patient with Grace, who preferred reading to ranch work. He still found time to steal moments alone with Nora, whether it was a quick kiss in the barn or late-night conversations in their bedroom after the children were asleep. Margaret lived to see all her grandchildren born, finally passing peacefully in her sleep when Eddie was 8. It was a sad time, but also a celebration of a life well lived. Sarah continued to thrive in her cottage, her arthritis improving somewhat in the dry Arizona climate, and she was an integral part of the children's lives. The ranch prospered under Hank and Joshua's management. They expanded their herd, bought additional land, and weathered the occasional drought or harsh winter with skill and determination. The Triple K became known as one of the finest ranches in the territory, producing quality beef cattle and breeding stock. When Eddie was 12, Hank took him on his first cattle drive to the railhead in Flagstaff. It was a rite of passage, and the boy came back 2 weeks later sunburned, exhausted, and glowing with pride. Thomas begged to go on the next drive, though he was still too young. Grace, meanwhile, announced she wanted to be a teacher, which delighted Nora. There were not enough schools in the territory, and educated women were needed through it all. Nora and Hank's love deepened and matured. The passionate excitement of their courtship and early marriage evolved into something richer, a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. They still argued occasionally, usually about something minor like household expenses or how to discipline the children, but the arguments never lasted long. They had learned to communicate, to listen to each other, to compromise. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hank recreated their engagement, taking Nora back to the meadow where he had proposed. They left the children with Alina and spent the whole day there, just the two of them, remembering their early days together and talking about the future. "Do you ever regret giving up your message deliveries?" Hank asked as they lay on a blanket, watching clouds drift overhead. "Not for a moment," Nora said honestly. "That job saved me when I needed it, but this life, our life, is everything I ever wanted. Sometimes I think about that girl I was, running through Jerome Junction with telegrams, and it feels like another lifetime." "I'm glad I sent you that message asking you to marry me," Hank said, pulling her close. "Best decision I ever made," Nora laughed. "You didn't ask me in a message. You asked me in person in that meadow. True, but I sent you the note asking to court you. That was the beginning. Actually, the beginning was when I delivered that telegram to the ranch, and your mother made me stay for supper." "We could argue about this all day," Hank said, kissing her. "The point is, I'm grateful for every moment that led us here. I love you, Nora Collar, more now than the day we married." "I love you too," she whispered. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, they rode back to the ranch house, hand in hand. Their children were waiting, eager to show them drawings and tell them about their day. Sarah was there too, smiling from her rocking chair. Alina and Joshua stayed for supper, and the house was full of noise and love. Later that night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Nora stood at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the starlit landscape. Hank came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. How lucky I am, how grateful." "I'm the lucky one," he murmured. "You're everything to me, Nora, you and our children, this life we've built together." She turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face. Even after 10 years, he could still make her heart race. "Promise me something." "Anything. Promise me we'll always be like this, always in love, always partners." "I promise," he said solemnly, "until death parts us, just like we vowed, and maybe even after that." They kissed, a slow, deep kiss that led them to their bed, and another night of lovemaking that was as passionate and fulfilling as their wedding night had been. Age and familiarity had only made them better at pleasing each other, and they took their time, savoring every touch and whisper. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Nora thought about the journey that had brought her here. If someone had told that lonely message girl delivering telegrams in the Arizona heat that she would end up with all this, a loving husband, 3 beautiful children, a prosperous ranch, a family that adored her, she would not have believed it. Life had been hard after her father died, full of worry and struggle. But it had led her to Hank, and that made everything worthwhile. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and celebrations. Eddie grew into a fine young man, serious and responsible, clearly meant to take over the ranch someday. He started courting a minister's daughter from town when he was 19, a sweet girl named Lucy who fit seamlessly into the family. Grace went away to teachers' college in Tucson, breaking everyone's hearts but making them proud. Thomas proved to have a gift with horses and began training them for sale, adding a new income stream to the ranch. Nora and Hank aged together gracefully. Gray threads appeared in Nora's blonde hair, and Hank developed lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun. But they were healthy and active, still running the ranch together, still in love after all these years. When Nora was 40, Sarah passed away peacefully in her cottage, surrounded by family. It was a gentle death, and though they all mourned, there was comfort in knowing she had spent her last years happy and secure, watching her daughter thrive and loving her grandchildren. They buried her next to Edward in the Jerome Junction Cemetery, and Nora planted roses on her grave. Eddie married Lucy in a beautiful ceremony when he was 21, and a year later, they presented Nora and Hank with their first grandchild, a baby girl named Nora, after her grandmother. Holding the tiny infant, seeing her daughter-in-law glowing with new motherhood, Nora felt the circle of life continuing. She remembered being that young mother, exhausted and elated, supported by Margaret, just as she now supported Lucy. Grace returned from teachers' college and took a position at the Jerome Junction School, where she was beloved by her students. She remained unmarried, declaring she was content with her independence and her work, though Nora suspected there had been some disappointed suitor in Tucson. Grace lived in town during the week, but came home to the ranch every weekend, and she was the favorite aunt to all the growing brood of grandchildren. Thomas married at 23, choosing a spirited ranch girl named Annie who could ride and rope as well as any man. They had twin boys right away, doubling the chaos and joy at family gatherings. Thomas and Annie built a house on the far edge of the ranch property, where Thomas continued his horse training business. Through everything, Hank remained Nora's rock and her joy. He was an involved grandfather, teaching his grandsons to ride and spoiling his granddaughters shamelessly. He and Joshua ran the ranch together until Joshua's health began to fail in his 50s, at which point Eddie gradually took over more responsibility. The transition was smooth because Hank and Eddie worked well together, sharing the same values and vision for the Triple K-Tk's future. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were grandchildren running everywhere, and great-grandchildren too. Eddie and Lucy had been married long enough to have a married daughter of their own. The house that had once seemed so spacious now felt crowded with love and laughter. Nora looked around at the gathering and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Every person here existed because she had delivered a telegram to a ranch 25 years ago, because a handsome cowboy had taken a chance and sent her a message asking to court her. From such a small beginning had grown this entire family tree, this legacy of love. Hank found her standing alone for a moment on the porch, watching the sunset. He wrapped his arm around her waist, and they stood together in comfortable silence. "What are you thinking?" He asked, the same question he had asked hundreds of times over the years. "That I would do it all again," Nora said. "Every moment, every choice. It's all been worth it to end up here with you with all of this. Even the hard parts, the money troubles in the early years. The drought of '92, the time Thomas broke his arm and we thought it might not heal right. Even those parts," Nora confirmed. "The hard times made the good times sweeter, and I always had you beside me. That made everything bearable." Hank pulled her closer. I love you, Nora Collar. You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, and you still make my heart race like I'm a young man courting you for the first time. I love you too, she whispered. Always. They kissed, a gentle touch of lips that still held passion and promise. Behind them, someone started playing a fiddle, and soon there was dancing in the yard, just like at their wedding reception. Hank led Nora down the steps and spun her into a dance, and for a moment they were young again, newly married and full of dreams. But this was better than being young, Nora thought as Hank expertly guided her through the steps. This was having lived those dreams, having built something real and lasting. This was knowing that their love had stood the test of time, had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs, and had only grown stronger. As the night deepened and the stars came out, the family gradually drifted away, some to bed, others to homes of their own. Finally, it was just Nora and Hank again, sitting on the porch in the rocking chairs that had once belonged to Margaret. "Remember the first time you came here?" Hank asked. "You were so professional, so determined to do your job right." "I was terrified your mother would think I was rude," Nora admitted. "She was quite intimidating. She loved you from the start, told me that very evening that if I let you get away, I was a fool. She was a wise woman." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, listening to the night sounds of the ranch cattle lowing in the distance, horses shifting in the barn, an owl calling from the trees. This was home. This was everything. Inside the house, Nora could hear the murmur of voices as Eddie and Lucy settled their youngest children for the night in the guest rooms. Tomorrow, the house would be chaotic again with breakfast preparations and children's laughter. But for now it was peaceful, just her and Hank and the memories of 25 years together. "You ever think about the telegraph office?" Hank asked suddenly. "About Mr. Kowalski and your old routes?" "Sometimes," Nora admitted. "Kowalski passed away years ago, you know. His son runs the office now, and Jerome Junction has changed so much. There are automobiles in town now and electric lights in some buildings. It's a different world from when I was running messages." "The world changes, but some things stay the same," Hank said. "Love, family, the land. These things endure." "You're getting philosophical in your old age," Nora teased gently. "I'm only 48, that's not old. And I'm 42, we're in the prime of life." He laughed and pulled her up from her chair. "Come to bed, wife, I want to hold you." They walked through the quiet house, past the rooms where their children and grandchildren slept, up to their bedroom that had been their sanctuary for a quarter century. As they prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routine of unpinning hair and removing boots, Nora felt a wave of contentment wash over her. This was what happiness looked like, not a single perfect moment, but a lifetime of moments strung together like beads on a necklace. Some beads were bright and beautiful, others dark and difficult, but together they made something precious and complete. In bed, Hank gathered her close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. They made love slowly, tenderly, with the practiced ease of long familiarity, but still with passion and desire. Even after all these years, he could still make her body sing, could still bring her to heights of pleasure that left her breathless. Afterward, drowsing toward sleep, Hank whispered, "I'd marry you again tomorrow if I could. 1,000 times over I'd choose you." "And I'd say yes," Nora murmured, "every single time." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had on their wedding night and hundreds of nights since. Outside, the Arizona sky blazed with stars, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding vows, the births of their children, and every moment of joy and sorrow in between. The years continued their steady march. Nora and Hank celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th. They became great-grandparents multiple times over, and the ranch expanded to accommodate the growing family. Modern conveniences gradually came to the Triple K, a telephone line in 1908, electricity in 1912, even a truck for hauling supplies in 1915. But some things remained constant. Hank and Nora still took their morning coffee together on the porch, watching the sun rise over the hills. They still danced together at family gatherings, moving a bit slower now but no less gracefully. They still shared their bed and their hearts, their love as strong as ever. When they were both in their 60s, Hank's health began to decline. Nothing dramatic, just the gradual wearing out that comes with age and hard work. His joints ached in cold weather, and he tired more easily. Eddie had long since taken over the day-to-day running of the ranch, which gave Hank more time to spend with Nora, and they were grateful for it. They took walks together in the evenings, shorter now than in their youth but still precious. They talked about everything and nothing, memories of their life together, observations about their grandchildren, plans for the future. Sometimes they simply sat in silence, hands clasped, needing no words. On a warm spring evening when Nora was 63 and Hank was 69, they sat together in their meadow, the place where he had proposed so many decades ago. The stream still burbled over the rocks, and the grass was green from recent rains. They had ridden out on the gentlest horses, moving slowly but steadily. "I want to be buried here," Hank said suddenly. "When my time comes, right here in this meadow." Nora's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "Don't talk about dying, you're going to live forever." "We both know that's not true." He took her hand, his fingers still strong despite his age. "I'm not afraid of death, Nora. I've lived a good life, a full life. I have no regrets, but I want you to know my wishes. Here in this meadow where I asked you to marry me. And I want you beside me when your time comes. Then we'll need to buy this land from the ranch," Nora said practically, though her eyes were wet. "Make it legally ours so it can't be sold or changed. Already done. I deeded it to us personally 5 years ago. Eddie knows. It's in the will." They sat quietly, absorbing the weight of the conversation. Neither of them was ready for their time together to end, but they also were not foolish enough to believe they had forever. "Promise me something," Nora said. "Anything. Promise me you'll hold on as long as you can. Don't leave me before you absolutely must." "I promise," Hank said solemnly. "And you promise me the same. When I'm gone, you keep living. Enjoy your children and grandchildren. Don't spend your remaining years grieving." "I can't promise not to grieve," Nora said honestly. "Losing you will be the hardest thing I've ever faced, but I'll try to keep living. For you." They embraced then, holding each other tight, and Nora breathed in the scent of him, leather and sage and something uniquely Hank. She tried to memorize everything about this moment, knowing that someday it would be only a memory. But that day was not today. Today, Hank was still here, still holding her, still loving her. And that would have to be enough. They had 5 more good years together. 5 years of watching grandchildren grow and marry, of holding great-great-grandchildren, of sitting on the porch and telling stories about the old days. 5 years of love and laughter and the quiet contentment of a long marriage. Hank passed away on a cool October morning in his sleep, with Nora beside him. He simply did not wake up, slipping away peacefully in the night. The doctor said it was his heart, worn out after nearly 75 years of beating. The family gathered and they mourned, but there was also celebration of a life extraordinarily well lived. They buried him in the meadow, just as he had wished. The whole family was there: children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, even a few great-great-grandchildren. The service was simple but moving, and Nora stood dry-eyed through it all, drawing on a strength she did not know she possessed. It was only later, alone in their bedroom, that she finally broke down. She lay in their bed, clutching his pillow that still smelled like him, and let herself cry. She cried for the loss, for the loneliness, for all the years ahead that she would have to face without him. But she also remembered her promise. She would keep living. For him, the months after Hank's death were the hardest of Nora's life. She moved through each day mechanically at first, going through the motions because that was what was expected. But gradually, with the support of her family, she began to heal. Not to forget she would never forget, but to accept. She spent time with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather. She helped Lucy with the newest babies, finding purpose in the endless cycle of life. She even started writing down the story of her life, from her days as a message girl to her marriage to Hank, wanting to preserve it for future generations. On what would have been their 45th wedding anniversary, Nora rode out to the meadow alone. She sat by Hank's grave, which Eddie had marked with a beautiful stone, and talked to him as if he could hear her. "I miss you," she said simply. "Every day, every moment. But I'm still here, still living, just like I promised. The ranch is doing well. Eddie is a fine manager, and Thomas's horse business is thriving. Grace finally married, can you believe it? A widower professor who teaches at the university. She seems happy." She paused, pulling up a few weeds that had sprouted around the grave. "I'm 68 now. I feel it in my bones, especially in the mornings. But I'm healthy, and the doctor says I could have years yet. I don't know if I want years without you, but I'll take what comes." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, Nora could almost believe it was Hank's voice telling her he loved her. She smiled, wiping away a few tears. "I'll love you forever," she whispered, "until we meet again." Nora lived another 7 years after Hank's death. 7 years of watching her family grow and thrive, of being the beloved matriarch who held everyone together. She was there when Eddie's first great-grandchild was born, making her a great-great-grandmother. She was there when Thomas won a prestigious award for his horse breeding program. She was there for every birthday, every holiday, every important moment. And then, on a peaceful spring morning much like the one when Hank had died, Nora simply did not wake up. She was 75 years old, and like Hank, her heart had finally worn out. Her family gathered around her grave in the meadow, beside Hank's, and celebrated a life of love and dedication. Eddie, now an old man himself, spoke at the service. "My mother taught me about strength," he said, his voice carrying over the assembled crowd. "About dedication and love. She showed me what it means to be a partner, to build a life with someone. My parents' love story began with a telegram and ended with 2 graves in this meadow, but the impact of that love will continue for generations. We are all here because of them, because they chose each other and built this family." There were tears and laughter as people shared memories. Grace told the story of how her parents met, making it come alive for the younger generations who had never heard it. Thomas spoke about his father teaching him to ride, and his mother patching up his scraped knees with endless patience. Lucy talked about Nora's wisdom and kindness, how she had made being a young bride and mother so much easier. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren spoke too, each sharing their own special memories. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than she found it. As the sun set on the meadow that evening, long after the service had ended and the family had returned to the ranch house, a young couple walked hand in hand to the graves. They were distant descendants, great-great-grandchildren who barely remembered Nora but who had grown up on stories of her and Hank. "You think they really loved each other that much?" the girl asked. Or is it exaggerated over time? The young man looked at the matching headstones, side by side in the meadow. The inscription on Hank's read, "Beloved husband, father, and grandfather, he built a legacy of love." Nora's read, "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She delivered more than messages, she brought joy to all who knew her." "I think it was real," he said. "Look at what they built, not just the ranch, but this whole family. You don't create something like that without real love." They stood in silence for a moment, then walked back toward the ranch house, where lights were glowing in the windows and the sounds of family drifted on the evening air. Behind them, in the meadow, two graves rested side by side, just as Hank and Nora had rested side by side for 45 years of marriage. Their love story had begun with a simple delivery, a telegram carried across town by a hardworking young woman. It had grown into a courtship, a proposal in a meadow, a wedding, and a lifetime partnership. Through hard work and dedication, through joy and sorrow, through children and grandchildren and all the challenges life had brought, their love had endured. And now, even in death, they were together, their legacy living on in the family they had created and the ranch they had built. The Triple K continued to thrive, passed down through generations, each one carrying forward the values Hank and Nora had instilled: hard work, integrity, loyalty, and above all, love. In the ranch house, Eddie sat in the chair that had once been his father's, surrounded by children and grandchildren. He looked around at the gathered family and felt his parents' presence, as if they were there in spirit, smiling at what they had created. "Tell us a story, Grandpa," one of the littlest great-grandchildren begged. Eddie smiled. "Did I ever tell you about how your great-great-grandmother used to deliver messages all over Jerome Junction, and how your great-great-grandfather sent her a message that changed both their lives forever?" The children gathered close, eager to hear the story they had heard many times before but never tired of. And Eddie began to speak, his voice carrying the love and respect he still felt for his parents. "It all started on a hot July day in 1883, he began, when a young woman named Nora Jensen delivered a telegram to a ranch called the Triple K. And so the story continued, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of love, the strength of family, and the legacy two people can build when they choose each other and hold fast through all of life's storms. In the meadow, the wind rustled through the grass, carrying with it the whisper of two souls finally at rest, together for eternity, their love story complete but never truly ended. For love like theirs does not die, it transforms, becoming part of the earth and sky, the land and the family, living on in the hearts of all who came after. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Arizona hills in brilliant shades of gold and purple, those who knew the story would sometimes swear they could feel the presence of that enduring love, still watching over the ranch, still blessing the family, still as strong and true as the day a cowboy asked a message girl to be his wife, and she said yes.